Today's program, which everyone can see and hear, I am audio only. Our partner today is Church World Service. Adamu Muhammad is Community Organizing Coordinator at Church World Service. And I'll turn this now to Adamu. Thank you.
Thank you, Whitney. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Adamu Mohammed. I'm a community organizing coordinator, like Whitney said, with Church World Service. We are a proud member of the Immigration Roundtable of the League of Women Voters of the Triad. And as you all know, Church World Service, CWS, is an international humanitarian organization that comprises of 37 members communion and one of the 9 refugee resettlement agencies in the United States that does resettlement of refugees. We operate in 24 community-based local offices and affiliates. One of our offices based here in Greensboro opened its door in 2009. Working with partners, community partners, we have welcomed hundreds and thousands of refugees in the Triad and equipped them with resources and skills necessary to achieve long-term and self-sufficiency so that they may all thrive and we all thrive. CWS Greensboro offers comprehensive economic and social support to help refugees integrate into the local community by providing basic need assistance, case management, volunteer mentorship and support, leadership development, community organizing with former refugees and immigrants, and advocacy opportunities, as well as immigration and legal services. As we all know, the last 4 years have been a struggle for those of us seeking safety in the United States, and for those of us as well who are advocating for the rights of protection. The current administration presents us with new opportunities, not only to undo the harms created by the previous one, but to rebuild the systems that fully center the needs of people in need of refuge. So we are really happy to have been invited to be part of the Immigration Roundtable for years, and we're happy to be a co-sponsor. Thank you.
Thank you, Adamu. This is Whitney Vanderwerf again, coming to you via audio only. I'm introducing our speaker, Jeremy McKinney. Jeremy McKinney is first vice president of the American Immigration Lawyers Association, AILA. He's the founder of the McKinney Immigration Law Firm with offices in Greensboro and Wilmington. Jeremy graduated magna cum laude from Virginia Commonwealth University and received his Juris Doctorate from Campbell University School of Law. He is a North Carolina board-certified immigration law specialist. He has served in several positions on AILA's Board of Governors and is now National First Vice President. Jeremy is not only nationally acclaimed, but consistently engaging, as you will see. We are honored to have our speaker today, Jeremy McKinney.
Thanks, Whitney, and thanks, Adamu. I appreciate everyone for coming out. Again, I'm Jeremy McKinney. My office is here in Greensboro on this yet another rainy day here in North Carolina. I've been practicing immigration law since 1997, been a member of the American Immigration Lawyers Association, or AILA, since 1997. And again, as Whitney said, I'm currently first vice president. I used to say, barring a coup, I will be president in June of 2022, but after January 6th, that just doesn't seem to ring well anymore to even use that word. So I'm very happy to be here. We're going to take the next hour or so to outline where we are at and where we think we are going with immigration policy in the United States. And then we're going to open it up for questions. So before we jump in, let me say that immigration policy is two things. Number one, it is complex. There is I will not be able to break down the system in 1 hour or 2 hours. I typically teach a class on this that takes the entire semester. Number two, it's deeply personal. During the Q&A, if at all possible, please keep your questions general on and focused on policy. There's a time and a place for individuals' questions or personal situations, and it's certainly not on a general Zoom call. So we want to respect everyone's privacy and keep it at a meta level where we're talking about policy and not about individual cases. All right, so before we jump in, I want to start with just a general overview of our immigration system. Adamu, slide. Sorry. Okay, so everyone that is in the United States with some type of legal status falls within this family tree of U.S. immigration. At the top, every person can be split into two categories, citizens and non-citizens. Non-citizens historically was referred to as aliens. Fortunately, we've seen a movement away from the word alien and more towards something that is more appropriate, which is citizens versus non-citizens. Can we go back? Within citizens, people were either born here or they derive it from their parents. So for example, John McCain was born in Panama. Ted Cruz was born in Canada. Those are examples of people that are US citizens at birth, but they derive US citizenship from their parents. And then finally, there's naturalization. And that's the process where a person who has immigrated to the United States then becomes a US citizen, typically through a process that requires passing security tests, security and safety checks, and demonstrating a basic knowledge of English and passing a civics exam. So that's the citizen side. On the non-citizen side, non-citizens are split between immigrants and non-immigrants. Immigrants are people that intend to remain in the United States indefinitely. It is typically, the evidence is typically a green card, a lawful permanent resident card. And people can immigrate to the United States through several different ways. The most common, which represents about 70% of US immigration, is through family. And that is through your spouses or parents or children. At times, it's even brothers or sisters. US citizens can sponsor parents and spouses and children, regardless of marital status, regardless of age, and siblings. Permanent residents can sponsor spouses and unmarried children. So that's how one immigrates through family. Employment, and employers that typically have to demonstrate that they can't find a US worker minimally qualified to do the job can sponsor individuals to immigrate based on employment. The next one is diversity lottery. Every year, our federal government provides immigrant visas for 50,000 individuals, and that is based on diversity. So if it's a country that can commonly immigrate to the United States or commonly immigrates to the United States, Mexico, India, mainland China, for example, those citizens are not eligible. But if you were born elsewhere, you can enter into a lottery. And every year, about 10 to 12 million people apply into this diversity visa lottery. And then about 100,000 names are selected each year. and then there's basically a race to 50,000. They're ranked and given preference. And once the 50,000 are gone, then they're gone for the year. There's a big problem with that right now because of COVID. There's a whole class of individuals that are at risk of not being able to immigrate because of travel bans. And so AILA has litigation on that right now going to get, I think we're down to about 10,000 people left that we need to get in before this once in a lifetime opportunity expires for these individuals. Another way is near and dear to organizations such as Church World Service, and that is asylum or refugee. Now, it's all the same concept. What it's about is a fear of persecution on account of one of 5 specific reasons. When you're outside the United States, that is seeking refugee status. And when you're in the United States, you're applying to become an asylee. You're applying for asylum. But the concepts are almost identical. It's just where you're applying depends on whether you're a refugee or an asylee. And finally, there's country-specific legalization. So we've had it in place with Cuba for years, the Cuban Adjustment Act. We've had it in the past for Haiti, and we currently have it in place right now for Liberia. This is country-specific legislation that allows people that are citizens of a particular country to apply for to immigrate to the United States. So we have had Liberians here for decades in a type of temporary status. And so Congress finally realized that we needed to make a clear pathway for those individuals to become permanent residents. And that passed actually during the Trump administration and was extended by the Biden administration. On the other side of the coin are non-immigrants. Non-immigrants, and you see where I've written there alphabet soup, and that is because the different types of visas are divided by letter, and almost every letter of the alphabet is assigned to a visa classification. So a tourist is a B, a student is a F. I'm skipping around. A lot of workers are H's. But when you hear someone in that type of status, typically that person's a non-immigrant. What makes a non-immigrant is that person's stay has an end date. And so there will be an expiration date of some type, whereas when a person immigrates, that has no end date, that is permanent. Even the expiration date on a person's permanent resident card is only on the card itself, the ID, not the status. The status is actually permanent. So that's basically the system. And what you don't see there are individuals that don't have status, out of status. And that also includes people like our dreamers who were given a type of executive grace from immigration enforcement, but don't actually have a formal immigration status. And so you've got, outside of this family tree of U.S. immigration, you've got approximately 10 to 11 million people in this country that aren't in the family, that need to be part of the family. And so what we've been grappling now with for decades is, how do we properly assimilate this group of the undocumented population into our family tree? Because they're already here, they're already part of our community, they give us so much, they contribute so much. How do we basically formally bestow some type of formal status on these individuals? So that's a big part of our immigration policy. So with that said, what we've seen here over the last few decades is a couple of troubling trend signs that we got to pay attention to as we enter into the Biden years. Number one, constitutionally, there is a doctrine in place that sharply limits the ability of courts to review immigration regulation and immigration actions. There is limited judicial review, and under the last 4 years, we saw a lot of successful litigation, but that's because the actions were often so extreme that a court could step in. But what you need to understand is that for most immigration policy, you are not going to see courts able to really change it. So there's very little that we can do as lawyers to litigate change in the immigration system. It's really around the margins, or when an executive branch is just off the farm and you're able to get courts to try to bring some semblance of sanity back into the system. But I would argue that a bigger problem is not between the executive branch and the courts. It's really between Congress and the executive branch. What we have seen in the last few decades is a Congress that is no longer capable of doing big things. And there may be a variety of reasons for that: campaign finance, gerrymandering, the filibuster in the Senate. Regardless of the reason, right now you have a Congress, whether it's a Republican Congress or a Democratic Congress, that is really unable to do big things. And as a result, voters end up penalizing whoever is in power, and it seems to flip-flop every 2 to 4 years. And then the next crew comes in and they're just as ineffective as the last. We've got to change this system. And again, I don't know if the solution is ending the filibuster, campaign finance reform, trying to fight gerrymandering at the state level, or a combination of it all. But right now you have a Congress that can't seem to pass big things, and you have an executive, whether it's Republican or Democrat, trying to fix things by executive order, which, by the way, means that it can provide no stability, because as we see, when the next administration comes in, the new president can simply undo what the last president did. And so, again, unless we get Congress in to fix our system, then anything that I'm about to talk about with President Biden and the changes that he's already made can be simply undone, just like that, with the next president. And so one of the things that we need to do as a community of active voters is really demand that our representatives in Congress step up to push them to, again, be willing to do big things, whether it's COVID relief, whether it is immigration reform, because nothing is going to happen until Congress finds a way to work through the gridlock that has just taken hold and has really been there in a bipartisan way for decades. All right, so let's jump in. What we did see from President Biden was promises kept in a huge way, right from day one. So what I'm going to go through now are the changes that President Biden has already made. I'm going to do those in chronological order, starting with his first day in office. Next slide. Okay, so as promised, on President Biden's first day in office, he signed an executive order ending what we called the Muslim ban. Now, I think it was Adamu recently shared a video on Facebook from 4 years ago, when several of us were at Governmental Plaza downtown Greensboro fighting after President Trump signed a series of orders that created the Muslim ban and this crisis in our airports. and also the interior enforcement ban, and then restrictions on asylum and refugees. And all of that was in January of 2017. And we were already out on the streets trying to fight for change. The Muslim ban itself went through 2 successful challenges in court before a third version of this ban made it through the Supreme Court in a 5-4 decision. Well, finally, on Joe Biden's first day in office, he signed an executive order ending this outrageous and discriminatory ban. And also because, I don't know if you remember, but our former president liked to use the term extreme vetting. Well, President Biden has ordered the Department of State and the Department of Homeland Security to report back on the current vetting process within 4 months, so that we can begin to undo the damage there. Next slide. Okay, the Interior Enforcement executive order, again from January of 2017, that is now gone as well. And that was on President Biden's first day in office. Now, this memo, this executive order from 2017 was significant because what it did was that memo basically said that there are no priorities for deportation. So it doesn't matter whether a person was being released from jail for armed robbery and was subject to deportation, or whether it was grandma walking in an apartment complex at the wrong place at the wrong time, who had been where there's an ICE operation going on, and next thing you know, grandma's in ICE custody facing deportation. Under the January 2017 executive order, that's perfectly okay for ICE to do that and to treat those 2 individuals equally. There were no priorities. Whoever ICE could get its hands on could be deported. Now, that resulted in just incredible injustices. So Anne-Marie and I had a client that was pursuing a status as a victim of trafficking. And that person was taking out the garbage at a mobile home complex when ICE 2 ICE agents came up and asked about the person they were looking for. And my client walked over and was attempting to be helpful. And then at the end of the conversation, they said, well, do you have your papers? And he spoke to them. He didn't exercise his right to remain silent and ended up in ICE custody. Just insane. So the person is cooperating with ICE, trying to help them find the person that they're actually targeting. And instead, what he gets for his assistance was a trip to immigration detention. Under the new policies in place, which we'll talk about in a moment, that situation is not supposed to happen. Next slide. Again, this battle as to whether you count the undocumented population in the US Census went all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Chief Justice wrote the decision reversing the Trump administration and basically saying that the US Census counts all persons, not just citizens. You count the population. That's what the Constitution says. And so again, on day one, President Biden wanted to reassure the public that that's exactly what was going to happen in this US Census, as it has happened in every census in our history. Next slide. The wall. Day one, just where we stood on day one of the Biden administration is you had about 452 miles of wall built. Now, all but 80 miles was reinforcing a barrier, a physical barrier that was already there. But 80 miles of that was where there was no wall before. Understand that Mexico did not pay for the wall, nor did Congress authorize the construction of any wall between the United States and Mexico. What President Trump did was invoke an Emergency Powers Act, which enabled him to take money Congress had appropriated to the Defense Department, and a lot of it to Fort Bragg here in North Carolina, and use that money to pay for this wall between the United States and Mexico. So Mexico did not pay for this, we did. It's a great example of the rise of the administrative and executive state in this country and the weakness of Congress. Congress did not appropriate this money, so the president was able to use emergency powers unchecked, in essence, to start this construction and divert millions and millions of dollars away from the Defense Department and into this project. That ended on day one, again, January 20th by President Biden. Next slide. I mentioned Liberia earlier. There is a process, again, for Liberians to become lawful permanent residents, but that process can take some time. What President Biden did through this action, again on day one, was make sure that the temporary status of Liberians was reinstated. So it's called Deferred Enforced Departure, or DED. It is related to another type of status called Temporary Protected Status, or TPS. Again, overly complex for no real reason, but the bottom line is that it's the ability of the executive branch to postpone any enforcement actions against a group of individuals. And then there's a regulation in place that says if any action has been deferred in your case, you can get a work permit. And so that program was extended for 1 year for Liberians. Next slide. Memorandum preserving and fortifying DACA, or the deferred action for children for childhood arrivals. Again, another day one thing. I have not left January 20th yet. That's how active President Biden was on his first day in office. What that action does is it officially ends the effort to rescind DACA. You may remember Attorney General Sessions going in front of the cameras in September of 2017 to rescind DACA. The last administration seemed to, at least a lot of the individuals there, seemed to have a combination of being incredibly anti-immigration, restrictionist, but also not really, one might just say incompetent, because they managed to not fulfill their restrictionist plans through not going about the legal system correctly. And so that's exactly what you saw with DACA. Attorney General Sessions attempted to rescind it, and there were immediately court challenges, and those court challenges were successful, going all the way to the Supreme Court and winning at the Supreme Court. And so DACA was actually restored before this last election. But President Biden, on his first day in office, basically made it official. We're not trying to get rid of DACA. As a matter of fact, he instructed the Secretary of Homeland Security to take all actions to preserve and fortify DACA. Now, that executive order did not change the rules. So right now, the rules are that you have to have been in the United States when President Obama created the policy. That was June of 2012. And then 5 years before that, so that pushes it back to June of 2007. You can't have any felonies or significant misdemeanors or 3 or more misdemeanors. You have to have a high school diploma or GED, or you got to be in school right now. All those rules are still in place. We are hoping that we will see a change in those rules, like a change in the effective date, maybe moving 2007 to 2012 or 2014 or whatever, just moving that date up. Or perhaps changing the date. You had to have arrived in the United States right now before your 16th birthday, maybe changing that to 18. But we will see. The important thing is right now is that DACA is back, and it's to provide protection to the hundreds of thousands of people that have it, that need it, that depend on it. What we're going to show right now is a brief video of 2 of our local DACA recipients talking about their journey.
Hey, my name is Guillermo Vargas Andres, and I'm a critical care nurse.
My name is Jonathan Vargas Andres. I'm 30 years old, originally from Mexico, and I'm also a critical care nurse. The reason why we moved here is just that, we come from a town that doesn't have a lot of opportunities economically. My dad was working from 4 in the morning to 11 o'clock at night, and it just wasn't enough to support a family.
It was a private college, so it was very expensive. So that was like the first stop that that kind of faced is the fact that I got accepted, and I had everything ready to do except the fact that I could not pay for it. I could not obviously feel any sort of financial aid because I did not have a Social Security. Obviously, I had to give it away, and then I just started working. But ever since then, I knew that, I had to go back to school. There was just, that was my original plan. And the funny thing is that that year I was actually about to leave. I was gonna go back home to go back to school. I couldn't make it here. I wasn't happy. I knew that I needed to do something better, for my life. That's the reason why my parents brought me here, and unfortunately I couldn't make it. So my last resort was just to go back home and go back to school. And thank God I did, because it was actually it was our priest who said, "I believe God has got something for you here. Just hold on for a little longer."
We tried to join the Marines, but unfortunately, I think DACA was such a new thing that this is like 3 months after DACA was instated by the Obama administration. So I think people didn't know what it was. When we went to the Marines recruiting's office, they didn't know what it was. It's obviously not a permanent residency. It is not citizenship. So it's kind of like in a gray area. So because of that reason, they told us we couldn't join. So we got rejected. Wanted to join me because he wasn't completely sure what he wanted to do or what career path he wanted to take. So I told him, why don't you join me, give it a try, and see where it takes us. I think he knew it was the right path for him when we started taking biology classes and we fell in love with like the human body and the anatomy.
we always knew that we wanted to do critical care. We kind of went all over the hospital. We had a main unit, but we took shifts all over the hospital just to kind of see what we wanted to do after. And critical care was definitely what we wanted to do. We had someone that actually, a friend of ours, that worked in Baptist, and she offered to shadow us. She was like, hey, you guys want to come in, since you graduated, to see if you guys want to do, if you would like to work with us. And sure did. We went to Baptist, and that's how we ended up getting hired at Baptist Hospital. We are called dreamers, but it's not us. We're not I'm not the dreamer. The dreamer was my dad, and the dreamer was my mom, who like, they wanted to bring us here. They wanted a better future for us. We're just the result of their work. And just like us, there's a lot of people that want to take advantage of that. And we deserve the chance. Once again, just like my brother and I, there's many other people out there that have really good potential. There's a lot of barriers, just like we told you guys, as far as all the stuff that we've been like shut down and put a door in our face. But we just gotta keep moving, and we can't give up. And we need to stop being treated as second-hand citizens, by the way.
Yeah. I just want people to make sure also, I feel like it's easy to, especially right now in the political climate that we're in, it's easy for people to take their country for granted, and I just want to make sure that everyone knows that America is a great country. The American dream is still very much alive if you work for it. This is coming from an undocumented immigrant who is about to finish his bachelor's degree in nursing. So the opportunities are there. You just have to work for them. And that's what makes this country great. Because as my brother said, the country is where we come from. You can work as hard as you can, and sometimes you make no progress. And that's the beauty of this country, that if you set your mind to it and you work towards a goal, you can achieve them. And you can get out of the hole that you were before. So I want people to take a moment and realize that the greatness that we live in.
All right. I don't know if you can hear me. It says I can't start video, but I'll move ahead and just let me know. All right. So what hopefully is a priority for this new administration, and really in all of us as active voters, is making sure that these dreamers can get over the finish line. It's something that the overwhelming majority of the American public support. It's something that we can all agree on. And in this age where we disagree on so much, it would be great if we could find our way to just do some good out there. what President Biden is trying to do is give some space for Congress to be able to do just that. And that is by issuing also on the first day a memo on immigration enforcement policy. And what it did was it set up enforcement priorities. I mean, again, if you're talking about a population that is the size of North Carolina, you can't really we can't deport our way out of that problem. It doesn't really, regardless of your mindset on immigration policy, you're not going to deport a population that is the size of our entire state. And so you have to set priorities. And so what this was on January 20th was the first step in that direction. And then most importantly, it contained a 100-day pause on any types of physical deportations from the United States. By the way, I'm sorry, I'm sorry for getting distracted. Again, it's just saying that I can't start my video. And it says that I think it's just because we're all looking at, I don't know. Anyway, that's the way it is right now. All right, so the 100-day pause was, there was a pause on the pause. A federal judge in Texas stepped in to and granted the state of Texas a temporary restraining order, basically putting the pause button on the 100-day moratorium on physical deportations. We then saw ICE immediately jump into action and start deporting people again. It made a lot of news, including a lot of deportations to Haiti, of all places, which is currently going through civil strife, and there we go, which is currently going through civil strife. In addition to the fact that it hasn't really recovered from all the natural disasters that it suffered over the last decade. But the enforcement priorities are supposed to apply at every level of the deportation process, from who gets picked up to who gets placed into deportation proceedings, to which cases are appealed. And so we saw that almost immediately ignored by ICE. So we'll have to see how things go from here. Next slide. Again, of significance, the security bar, during the last few months of the Trump administration, there was a lot of activity basically for White House advisor Stephen Miller to get out every type of anti-immigration thing that he could before time was up. And one of those was basically an attempt for our government to deny people asylum or withholding of removal due to COVID, based on emergency public health concerns. But that rule was not eliminated, but delayed through March 22nd by the Biden administration. So we'll see what happens there. Next slide. Child separation. What zero tolerance means was when a person enters the United States without inspection, sneaks across the border, that is technically a federal misdemeanor. It's a misdemeanor, but because it's such a low-level crime, it's typically not prosecuted. What happened during the Trump administration was Attorney General Sessions, acting in concert with several other people, to create what is called a zero tolerance policy So they instructed the U.S. attorney's offices across the border to start prosecuting all adults that were apprehended sneaking across the border. Even if the person was requesting asylum, regardless of the reason, and then most importantly, regardless of how many children they had with them or the ages of those children. And because when someone is subjected to a criminal arrest and is going into criminal custody, of course that person's children cannot go with them. So that resulted on purpose in child separation. We now know from excellent reporting like Jacob Soboroff's book, Separated, that was the intent. The child separation was the intent, not the byproduct of having a total prosecution policy, but that was the intent because it was somehow supposed to create a lesson for people that were fleeing horrible conditions from coming to the United States. We're going to try to stem that by taking their children away from them. So that policy was rescinded by the Department of Justice on January 26th of 2021. Next slide. In 2020, the Trump administration attempted to increase fees to dramatic levels. These are immigration filing fees. What happened was again, because they didn't go about it the right way, we took them to court and we won in court, and the filing fee increase was halted a few days before it was set to take effect. What this decision on January 29th of this year does is basically state that the current fees are here to stay for the time being, that they are not pursuing, the Biden administration is not going to pursue that filing fee increase that the Trump administration attempted to impose in 2020. Next slide. Child separation. This was on the news a lot because Dr. Joe Biden is part of this group, but the president's created a task force to reunite families because there's still about 5,000 children that have not been reunited with their parents yet. And so doing so, again, as the Soboroff book Separated describes, the record keeping during the operation was non-existent because you're talking about different agencies. Children go into the care of Health and Human Services. Immigration detainees are in the custody of ICE, and criminal defendants are in the custody of the U.S. Marshals. And there wasn't sufficient record keeping. They were splitting up these parents from their children and not really keeping good records on where individuals were. We had kids being flown from the border to the East Coast and to Chicago and all over the place. And the parents were being deported left and right. And so now you've got these kids that were in essence orphaned by our government. This task force is being assembled to try to reunite those families. Next slide. Another complex anti-asylum policy of the last administration was the Remain in Mexico policy. Now, going all the way back to the family tree at the beginning of this talk, remember I said that seeking the protection of the United States, it's about venue. If you're outside the United States, you're applying to be a refugee. If you're in the United States, you're applying to be an asylee. Well, individuals routinely come to our border from north and south or the water, and they make it to our land and they request our protection. From that point, they go through the asylum process. Well, at the southern border, the Trump administration put in place the Migrant Protection Protocols, MPP, but what it's really called is Remain in Mexico. Because what happens is a person comes to the southern border, requests asylum, registers, and then is kicked out, sent back to Mexico to wait. So what that did was it created international refugee camps outside of our southern borders with miserable conditions and really a major lack of due process and even having those claims heard. Where we are at is there are still thousands of people outside the United States that are waiting on their hearing. But what President Biden put into place on February 2nd was an end to MPP. So at this point, anyone coming into the United States and requesting our protection falls under the normal process, and it will not be sent back into Mexico to wait. Those that are already in the MPP program are asked to be patient because the Biden administration is going through a process to have those individuals admitted and to be considered for asylum. As a matter of fact, we saw the first few people from the MPP program allowed into the San Ysidro, San Diego area just last week. So it's starting to happen. Next slide. This one's huge because every year, basically countries go to the UN and they say, how many refugees can we accept, right? And then you have refugee resettlement areas all over the world. And out of those individuals, everyone hit mute, please. Out of those individuals, you have Switzerland may take a certain amount, England, America, Canada, et cetera, et cetera. And so we had reduced our cap from a high of 125,000 annually to 15,000 last year. Outrageous, out of step with our obligation to fight persecution and torture, and really un-American. So with an order dated February 2nd, President Biden has restored the refugee admission ceiling to 125,000. Next slide. Piggybacking on the earlier order, which created some enforcement priorities, we got a little more meat on the bones last week, February 18th. Basically, there are three priorities for deportation right now. Number one, national security risk, obviously terrorists. Public safety risk. Now, the importance is in the definition. The current priority are individuals that have convictions for aggravated felonies that are also considered dangers to public safety. And then there was some added language about gangs. We're going to have to watch that to see how that ends up being implemented on the ground. But the point is that before, anyone that ended up at the police station was being sent to ICE. So that could include someone that was pulled over for a simple traffic ticket, driving without a license, speeding, running a stop sign, anything. If you ended up at the police station, you could end up in ICE custody. So this is important because what it's doing is it's protecting our public safety by having our overburdened ICE agents focus on people that are actual dangers or could be more so than someone that has been pulled over for a traffic ticket. And then finally, recent entrants. That's basically whenever you're trying to change immigration policy into something that is more favorable, obviously what you don't want to see happen is a huge number of people fleeing from their native land, coming into the United States because they think it's just open borders. And so recent arrivals, that is from November to present, are still considered enforcements for deportation. So that's a different question from how do we take care of the individuals that are already here. We're not supposed to see any more collateral damage. So that story I told you earlier about my client that was taking out the trash and ended up in an ICE private prison, that shouldn't happen. Whenever ICE goes out, they're supposed to be focused on the priorities that I listed, and they're not supposed to worry about people that are not priorities, people that are at the wrong place at the wrong time. If they want to go outside of those priorities, they have to obtain what is called pre-approval. And so again, today is February 22nd. This memo is 4 days old. So a big question is, how is this memo going to operate in the field? What's important about it is that the person that signed this memo is the head of ICE. And so it needs to be taken seriously. The question is, will it? Next slide. All right. So again, everything I've talked about over the last 45 minutes has been, go back one, has been about what has already happened between January 20th and February 18th. Amazing amount of change in less than a month. But oh boy, there's still a lot of work to be done. Our immigration system has been broken for decades, and then there was exponential harm done over the last 4 years. So it's going to take a while to fix. But what's next? What's on my mind is right here. We have something called the public charge rule that was put in place by Stephen Miller and President Trump. That is still in effect at our immigration service. As a matter of fact, the Supreme Court decided to take up the question of its legality today. And again, we have a 6-3 split between traditional conservatives and liberals, so not looking too great. Why is it still in effect? Why hasn't President Biden started the rescission process? It creates a poverty test for immigration, something that goes against our entire history. How much longer is that going to be in effect? We'll see. Why are the visa bans, the multitude of visa bans outside of the Muslim ban, why are those still in effect? Right before going out of the door, President Trump extended all of his different visa bans by an additional 90 days. So now they all expire March 31st of 2021. Will President Biden permit those bans to stay in place through the end of March? Or will he rescind those? Those do not take, that's just him signing off on it and they'll be gone. Why hasn't that happened yet? Why do we still have clients attempting to apply for a visa? Visas all over the world that are being held up by a discriminatory and xenophobic visa ban. That's different from COVID traveling restrictions, completely different. And by the way, the Biden administration has also put into place a system where you've got to be, you have to have a negative COVID test before being allowed in anyway. So what did these visa bans have to do with COVID at this point? We'll have to see what happens there. Will the administration fight the pause of the 100-day deportation pause? We will have to see, because right now they've just been letting it ride. They haven't really taken it up on appeal and haven't been very aggressive in challenging that. As I mentioned earlier, will the Department of Homeland Security issue expanded rules for deferred action for childhood arrivals, or DACA? Will they change the age from 16 to 18? Will they change the date that a person had to be physically present in the United States? Those are open-ended questions. Will the Department of Homeland Security extend temporary protected status or deferred enforced departure to Venezuela? Or what about Central America, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua. These are all places that have had, well, Guatemala hasn't, but the other three have had TPS in the past. And the only TPS holders are those that had that status back in 2001 or 1998. If you reinstate Central America as TPS countries, that would provide a class of individuals the ability to not be deported and to get employment authorization. So that's something super important, super easy. And Venezuela, literally the day before Trump was to leave office, he granted deferred enforced departure to Venezuelans. Now, that was immediately taken off the webpage by the Biden administration, and there is anything that was last minute like that is subject to delay, and that has been delayed by the Biden administration. Is President Biden going to offer something to Venezuelans that are in the United States? Venezuela right now has, in essence, collapsed. Their economy has collapsed, and their government, there's a lot of civil strife right now because there's, in essence, a dictator in place in that country, and they're not having free and fair elections. It's a lot of problems. And so will President Biden extend protection to Venezuelans in the United States? So everything I've listed here is something that falls entirely within the Biden administration. You don't need Congress. But as I said back at the beginning, we are not going to reform our system until we can get Congress to actually act. And so last week, we got the first sign of that in terms of an actual bill that was introduced in Congress. Next slide. Last week, the U.S. Citizenship Act was introduced in the House and the Senate. Immediately, the phones of immigration attorneys and nonprofits all over America started ringing with the question of, how do I apply under the new Biden law? So before even talking about this, I need to remind you all of Schoolhouse Rock. I'm just a bill. I'm only a bill. I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. This is not a law. This is an idea. It's a proposal. But boy, is it an amazing proposal. It is over 350 pages long, and it would solve the central issue of our immigration policy failings over the last 2 decades, and that is, how do we provide some type of pathway to residency for the 10 to 11 million in our country who are undocumented? Now, it would do it in 2 different ways. Number one, it provides a fast track for 3 different populations. Our dreamers. And by the way, the definition in this bill of dreamer is different than DACA. It is more expansive. It's not 16, it's 18. And it only requires presence here as of January of 2021. So it's dramatically different definition. TPS and deferred enforced departure recipients would be able to go fast track. And our farm workers would be able to go fast track. They're able to immediately apply for residency. Now, for everyone else, those individuals would not get to apply immediately for residency. They will be eligible for something called lawful provisional residency. And that would be good for 5 years. And then those individuals could apply for permanent residency. Again, extremely complicated, lots of great small changes. And we expect this bill, honestly, to pass close to its current form by the U.S. House The real game will be in the Senate, where we expect it to be considered in a piecemeal fashion, divided up, and we'll probably see parts of this pass. But the overall bill, I would be shocked if this entire bill, a comprehensive approach to immigration, could go through. One final thing before we go to Q&A. What we've seen over the last several decades is basically you're seeing the pendulum shift between legalization and enforcement, legalization and enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
What seems to be missing from all of this is actually a reforming or reimagining our legal immigration system to make it consistent with the law of economics and with our American spirit of incorporation. We need the entire system needs reform. We need to make the process easier to come here and work legally. And for those that want to come here and work and then not pursue residency, there should be an easier process in place for that. There should be an easier process in place that recognizes that 70% of our farm labor is undocumented. Why don't we have a program in place like what's called the H-2A process to make it easier for these farms to go through a process to have legal farm workers cultivating and harvesting for our economy. And so I still see that missing. I see that missing from this bill. There are some changes in there, but there's a lot of work to be done. So anyway, I don't want to spend a lot of time on that because I imagine that is going to change a lot as we move along. But that's the bill. It's a big deal. It fulfills a central campaign promise of Joe Biden. And so we all need to work together as a community to push our representatives to push for this in a bipartisan way. And we need to also have our listening ears on and for ideas and amendments to improve it from all voices, Democrat, Republican, Independent. All right, so I think Adamu has a piece here before we get into the Q&A.
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy, so much for this wonderful presentation. The slide I wanted to share with all of us, with all what Jeremy said and the work ahead of all of us, just want to highlight some of the organizations locally that are really helping alongside immigration attorneys like Jeremy and helping refugees and immigrants as they're making Greensboro and the Triad, North Carolina home. One of them is Center for the North Carolinians that you all are familiar with. You can see the websites and also the phone number to call. Great opportunity to either volunteer, support these organizations, or ask for any opportunities to take any actions with them. Church World Service, of course, Faith Action International House, the New Arrivals Institute, and North Carolina African Services Coalition. These are a few of the main organizations that help and support immigrants and refugees in our area. Thank you. Whitney? Whitney, if you're there.
I think she has to unmute, Adamu.
Yes. Press *6 to unmute yourself. While Whitney is trying to unmute herself, taking us to the call to action, I think Jeremy already mentioned. Okay, here you go, Whitney.
Yeah, I think I'm unmuted. Jeremy will let us know how to use the chat, what he would like to have this in terms of process. And shall we raise our hands? Just let us know, Jeremy. The question and answer period is beginning now, but at the beginning, let us know how you want us to work with you on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Whitney. What we've talked about is at first, Anne-Marie Dooley is going to, and Adamu, I believe, is going to go through the chat and ask the questions that were on the chat. And then after that point, we could have individuals just use the raise hand feature and ask the question. But we'll start with the questions that have been asked in the chat room.
Okay. Well, Jeremy, I'll start. I received 2 questions. First was going back to the DV lottery. Is a DV lottery eligible for services usually associated with refugees? And do you know what services they may be eligible for?
Are we talking about, okay, so a person that has immigrated to the United States as under the diversity lottery is a permanent resident. So a permanent resident is subject to all the benefits and services of any other permanent resident. Now, that includes a rather severe elimination on the ability to get public benefits at first. Now, refugees and asylees are exempt from those restrictions, but people that immigrate under the DV lottery are like any other permanent resident. So, for example, not being able to get most public benefits for the first 5 years, that would apply to that type of permanent resident as well. There are our refugees and our asylees are eligible for more in the public benefit space. In terms of actual nonprofits providing services, that would be dependent, I assume, and Adam may want to add more here on that particular nonprofit.
Yeah, I think you said it right, Jeremy. I mean, the only thing, services that permanent residents could get from working with nonprofit organizations, especially the immigration offices, is just when they're applying for citizenship. They can do so with nonprofits, also with legal offices across the town. That's all I can add.
All right, Jeremy, and do you have any sense of how U.S. businesses are they supporting this U.S. Citizenship Act? Has there been anything from the business community yet?
Yes. Well, first of all, we already know that the tech giants like Microsoft, Amazon, Apple are already very much pro-immigration because our legal immigration system is desperately in need of reform. But the Chamber of Commerce has been on board before, and we expect that they will be on board again. Again, this has turned into a political football, but historically, immigration was not really seen as a partisan issue. There were pro-immigration Republicans and there were anti-immigration Democrats. We've seen this shift into our traditional Democrat versus Republican, left versus right, but we didn't see it. It didn't start under Trump. President Bush was very much a proponent of immigration reform. And I remember he was bragging to Senator Ted Kennedy, like, I'll see you at the signing ceremony, right? For an immigration bill that ultimately failed. Again, with Obama, the Senate passed immigration reform in 2013. It would never even came up for a vote in the House. So it's become partisan, but I'm hoping that we can try to go back into a normal view that immigration doesn't really fit neatly within Democrat versus Republican. It's really about human rights and also economic opportunity, and it's very much pro-business. So we shall see.
All right, I've got another one. Will LPRs be able to apply for driver's licenses, work legally, and travel internationally while they await their green cards or citizenship?
Yes. And by the way, licensure is all about state law. So there's nothing, and this is important as we deal with our local state representatives, is that there is nothing that preventing the North Carolina DMV from once again going back to its historic policy of granting a driver's license to anyone that qualifies for a driver's license based on whether that person can pass a driving test, whether that person has insurance, all the normal stuff, instead of connecting it to immigration status. That is a matter of North Carolina law. And North Carolina could follow suit, like Washington State, like Maryland, like Virginia, like New York State, in eliminating an immigration, having some type of immigration status as a condition to getting a driver's license. If I'm in an auto accident, I would love to know that the other person involved in that auto accident has insurance and a license to drive. The current system is crazy, but we don't need a change in federal law to change that situation. That's state law. So we need to be talking to our local reps about that. On the U.S. Citizenship Act, under the provisional status, a person can work lawfully, a person can travel with permission.
Okay, thank you, Jeremy. The next question that was asked earlier is, what current strategies can we use with Congress to put policies in place? That's one of many questions that this person asked. Maybe I ask all the questions that they did. So what current strategies can we use with Congress to put policy in place? And then the next question they had was, what is being done to rescind deportations of individuals who have served in the armed forces that have been put in deportation, and what has been done to rescind this deportation? And finally, the children on the border, now in extreme conditions because of the ice storm in Texas. Have the president's executive orders improved their asylum status?
Okay, so a lot to unpack here. I'm going to start with the last one, which is not an easy question, but it's the easiest to answer. No, nothing with the ice storm, nothing has been put into place. We are seeing record numbers of people since January 20th released from ICE custody and now when someone's released from ICE custody, it's not like it's without restrictions. A lot of individuals have ankle bracelets and they have call-in and reporting requirements to make sure that ICE knows where they're at. But the point is that we're not paying a private company anywhere from $150 to $200 a day to house somebody that's not a threat to our community. And so we're already starting to see that change, Adamu, but I have seen nothing within the last week but the memo that provided the new interim priorities on immigration enforcement. The question is, we got to see that go into action. Is ICE going to actually follow their leadership, their new leadership, or continue to go what some argue is rogue? So that's one. I will admit, I am not sure if the military deportations, if bringing those individuals back is part of the U.S. Citizenship Act. Again, I've done my best to digest this bill, but it is, again, it's over 350 pages long, and it just came out on Friday. So I'm working through it. I didn't see anything on that. What I did see was the ability for someone that was deported under Trump that was here for at least 3 years before being deported by Trump's ICE to be able to pursue this provisional status and return to the United States. Now, having a specific provision in place for these military personnel that our government deported after they served their country, our country, I'm not sure if that's in the bill or not. On lobbying policy or on policy, Senator Tom Tillis just got reelected. Okay, he's got 6 years in office and he has expressed the willingness in the past to work across party lines on some of these immigration issues. And he's on the immigration subcommittee on the Judiciary Committee. So we have a powerful voice for good in the U.S. Senate. The question is, will he exercise that voice for good? I don't know. I'm certainly going to disregard any of his rhetoric from the last year while he was running for re-election. And I'm hoping that we're going to get back to a person that's willing to work in regular order. And what I mean by regular order is the way that Congress used to operate, where a bill goes to a committee and they have a markup and people from both parties bring their ideas to the table, and then the bill is improved and then sent to the full chamber, and then that's debated and changed. And I mean, we have a traditional process in place that we don't seem to do anymore. And so one of the things that we can do is just push Senator Tillis just to get involved. Don't just be an automatic no. An automatic no is going to mean two things. Number one, it is going to mean that Republicans are not going to have any meaningful input into this bill. And immigration is not partisan. There are plenty of Republicans that have great ideas on immigration. Number two, it's going to, as a practical result in the end of the filibuster in the Senate, because if Congress can't get big things done anymore, unless the filibuster disappears, I think we're going to see it disappear. So we need to push Senator Tillis to get involved.
Wow, that's powerful. Maybe I'll take the next question. Somebody is asking about any updates on detention center process or changes. Is there any update? And they're also asking about the status of the two ladies still living in a local church.
Okay, so the two ladies, one's Juana, who's the other that we're referring? Any idea, Adamu or Amory?
I don't think any in the immediate area. It might be.
Is it Rosa they're
Winston,
talking? Oh.
Winston or Raleigh in the Durham. I think
There was one in Chapel Hill. Is that who they're referring to?
Probably so.
Well, and I can't. If it is about if one of them's about Rosa, we won her case. So Rosa has won her case. She is out of sanctuary, and she has the protection of the United States government. Thanks to everyone's work and activism, we were able to not only get her out of sanctuary, but win her the protection of this country. We had to take it all the way to the second highest court in the United States, but we did it. And it's a published decision. So actually Rosa made law too. Juana is still in sanctuary, but she is pursuing her options at this time. I know she's eager. She was the first to go in, at least to our knowledge, in modern history in this area to go into sanctuary, and she is still there. But I'm hoping that with a change in enforcement policy, that Juana may soon be able to leave sanctuary and be reunited with her family. Again, she's a devoted mother and grandmother, and so we're hoping that she will leave the church soon. Detention policy, again, we're seeing a lot. The prison population due to COVID and now due to the change of administration is back down to a more reasonable level. We're in at least a decade. But we still got over 10,000 individuals in immigration detention. So we're not seeing it change fast enough, but we are starting to see it change. And it starts at the top with these priorities. If you just focus on people with really bad criminal convictions that are a danger to the public and on national security risk, that will take care of interior enforcement and keep us safe, while hopefully Congress can figure out a solution for the 10 to 11 million undocumented individuals we have living and contributing to our communities.
Thank you, Jeremy. Anne-Marie, just looking at the time, it's 1:30. We know we scheduled this program up to 1:30, but Jeremy has graciously accepted to be here till 2 p.m. to continue to answer your questions. So we will continue with Jeremy. If everyone still has questions, they can continue to raise their hands using the function so they can ask their question live. But there are still questions that have been posed in the chat. And Anne-Marie, over to you.
All right, there's one. You were talking about driver's licenses and being state law. Do you think the General Assembly is likely to become more immigrant friendly in North Carolina? Also, things that could be done at the local or county level, example, Alamance County.
Well, the main thing, I have a hard time until we see a larger demographic shift. I have a hard time seeing Alamance County, the politics of Alamance County changing anytime soon. I think they will, but I don't know if it's going to be in the near future. But what we saw in 2018 was not one, not two, not three, not four, but 5 sheriffs lose re-election in 2018. And arguably, a key component to each and every one of those sheriffs losing re-election was immigration, not for being too soft on the undocumented population, but for overly cooperating with ICE, resulting in families being separated, resulting in all of this unneeded misery. And so sheriffs in Greensboro, Winston-Salem, Wilmington, Charlotte, Raleigh, Durham, all were voted out in 2018 and replaced. That is how you make an impact locally. That is why Guilford County, I believe, is one of the friendliest, most immigrant-friendly places to live. Our home right here. It's because of actions like that.
That's awesome.
But in terms of our national and in terms of our General Assembly leadership, it's still controlled by Republicans. A lot of those come from rural areas that made their demographics and politics may not have shifted much as of late. But again, where it starts is a movement. And so movements start with talking to your local representatives and then making sure that a bill is introduced. That's just the next step in the process. There are things within immigration policy that I am trying to impact nationally during my time in AILA leadership that I know are going to take years. It's just each step of the way. It's a process. And so the step right now is we need a bill. We need a bill that provides, that permits DMV to issue a license to anyone that is eligible to be a safe and lawful driver here in the state.
Thank you. I think the next question that I saw in the chat is with regards to, see, how quickly do you think new refugees will be allowed to enter the US at the higher numbers?
That's a great question. First of all, in terms of the higher numbers, that we should see that happen in 2021. Will we make it to the 125,000? I doubt it, but I don't doubt it because of the need. I doubt it because of COVID. There's still just major travel restrictions going on internationally. And most of our consulates in the world are still not operating at full capacity. A lot are still closed, 100% closed. And then others are operating on a very restricted capacity. So as the world recovers from COVID-19, we will see that number go up. But I don't think that we're going to see 15,000 again. I think that we're going to see that number go up, and we're going to see it go up immediately in 2021.
Yeah, just to add to what you said, Jeremy, this fiscal year ends September 30th. And I think realistically 125,000 is not feasible, considering that the pipeline of refugees that were in the process of coming has been depleted, basically, because of the previous administration policies. So the target number is 62,500 for this fiscal year, if we can reach that. And then starting March, we're likely to start seeing an increase in number of arrivals. So all these agencies that are supporting new arrival will definitely be working a double shift to make sure that they have all the resources they need. And then fiscal year 2022, definitely we're hoping for that 125,000 to be met. Anne-Marie, over to you.
Oh, I don't see any more questions in the chat. Does anyone have any questions? Anyone want to raise a hand or submit a question through the chat?
Oh, I see.
And while we're waiting, though, I would like to say this is such a much more uplifting presentation than we've had in the last couple of years. So thank you, Jeremy, for bringing all this great news to us.
I agree with that. There was one that was sent privately by Virginia. Can you say more about detainees beside the obvious need to hold people already convicted of serious criminal activity? What about the others being held?
That's a great question. And we can't get answers soon enough. But what we saw after the first DHS memo on immigration priorities and the 100-day pause on deportations, we saw the field agents disregard it. We saw deportation still happening. We saw arrests and detention still continuing. The last memo, again, it came out on February 18th, 4 days ago. Will that actually be effective in the field? Because if so, then those individuals that do not fall within those priorities should be released. Will they? I wish I knew the answer to that question, but I don't. What we are doing as immigration attorneys, again, through AILA, which is an organization of almost 16,000 members, we've got our ears outside of every detention center in the United States. We've got ears on the ground, and we're ready, we're listening, and we're ready to provide information to headquarters in Washington if we see that in the field that the orders of leadership are still being disregarded. So stay tuned.
There's another question from Katie asking where is the best source of information on how we can influence our state legislators and our representative and Senate in Congress to seriously consider and hopefully pass legislation that is needed to fix the immigration system, like the Citizenship Act of 2021.
I'm going to actually defer to the roundtable on that question, because I think that that is what this group does best. They're amazing at basically a call to arms on different issues, such as the U.S. Citizenship Act. What I want to do is mention a couple of podcasts that will hopefully educate you a bit about immigration policy, so that to give some strength to your arguments, so that when groups like AILA or like this group provides descriptions, summaries, talking points, you'll have your own point of view because you know a little bit more about the complex history on immigration policy. So 2 podcasts. Number one, Vox Conversations from February 11th, 2021. Again, it's Vox VOX Conversations from February 11th, 2021. It's an hour-long conversation with Cecilia Munoz, who used to work in the Obama administration and worked on the Biden transition team, and is very much in the weeds on immigration policy. Excellent read on the approach that was taken in the past and the approach that the Biden administration is trying to take right now. Number 2, and I mentioned this actually when I spoke at the league last time, it's from 2018. And it's Revisionist History, Season 3, Episode 5, General Chapman's Last Stand. It's basically about the history of having physical barriers between the United States and Mexico, and how for most of our history, we had an economy of circular migration, where people came in and worked and went home, and we went there and worked and came back. And it was just this, that type of easy economic relationship that seemed to work for decades until one person came along and tried to change that in the 70s. And now we've ended up with this system of walls and barriers that we have now. So a really excellent read about our policy at the southern border, or I should say here, because it's a podcast. Anyway, Adamu, Anne-Marie, anyone from the roundtable on taking action?
Yes, this is Whitney. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think Whitney's on the line, so go ahead, Whitney.
Yeah, I am. And I wanted to point to a couple of things. You can go to the North Carolina legislature. It's ncleg.com to find those legislators. But Sue Stinson and her group have been directly in contact with our newly elected Kathy Manning. So I'm looking at that election as a key to reaching someone who we have her ear in terms of immigration. I wonder, Sue, if you could discuss that for a minute. Well, if we don't have Sue, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Whitney.
Sue is muted.
Sue will need to
Am I unmuted now?
Yes, you are, Sue.
Okay. And when you say my group, this is the group called FIND, Friends of Immigrant Neighbors Facing Detention, affiliated with Faith Action. We've met with Kathy Manning. She is certainly very supportive of immigration. She's a former immigration lawyer. And we are trying to arrange another meeting in the next couple weeks. But I'd say, so I don't have anything to say other than she's very supportive, and I encourage people to communicate with her if she is your representative. If she's not your representative, communicate with your representative, even if they don't support immigration. Let them know that they have constituents who do. And I think if you can be as specific as possible on whichever aspects of bills you're interested in, I'd say really work on this thing of driver's licenses with the North Carolina legislature. Let them know that you think we will all be safer if they, if everyone who wants to drive has to take a driver's license test. And eventually, then if they don't have a license, driving without a license would mean something. It would mean that you didn't pass the driver's license test, or you didn't take it, rather than not because you were unable to because of your immigration status, but because you weren't a good enough driver, and or you don't have insurance. We need to, with our Republican legislature, we need to stress the public safety aspects.
Yeah.
I think that's enough from me for now.
Thank you, Sue. I just want to add to the question that was asked earlier on by Andrew Young, like how do we, think or make our General Assembly more immigrant friendly? One thing that as an organizer we do is to try to educate our legislators. Sometimes we know there may be pressure from the other side, on them because of their constituency, trying to just please their constituency, but they're human beings. So meeting with them, educating them, sharing stories of how immigration policies are impacting people, and bringing along some of the impacted folks to those meetings so that they can hear the story, they can hear how they are, what brought them here to begin with, and how they are contributing to our community. And I think those are powerful ways we can try not to get them to be as friendly as we want them to be, because sometimes we have to speak beyond the choir. We're used to speaking to people, legislators who are friendly, but trying to speak to those who we think may not support us, but we may be able to move their heart a little bit based on the stories of people that are being impacted by their anti-immigrant policies or positions. So I will encourage us to have as many meetings with our representatives and just share stories and go with those people that are impacted by the policies. Thank you. There's another question, well, maybe a comment, but it's coming in about the agricultural and poultry workers, immigrants. So the person says, on a state level, we have an agricultural industry and poultry processing industry that utilizes guest workers and immigrant workers. Would not their interest be served to promote immigration legislation that will help the state economy as well as federal?
Yes. Farm worker legalization is not new. It's part of the 1986 amnesty when Ronald Reagan was president, provided a kind of quick line to residency for special agricultural workers. We have seen farm worker legalization come up year after year and co-sponsored by people, many members of both parties. Our late local representative, Howard Coble, used to co-sponsor farm worker legalization, a farm worker legalization bill every term. It's called Ag Jobs. But it never could come up for a vote. And that is because of the dysfunction in our current legislative process. There's too much of an incentive to just be against something instead of working together in a bipartisan manner through an amendment process to try to improve and pass pieces of legislation. I'm not going to pretend to have the solution for that, but I know it's the problem. And that's why we just aren't able to really tackle really large problems.
Thank you, Jeremy. I don't see any questions in the chat anymore. Anne-Marie, any questions on your end?
I don't see any more. Okay, it's last call. Oh, here comes the message. Let's see. Oh, yeah, that's the one about the ag workers. Nope, I don't see any more questions. Anyone have anything for Jeremy before we sign out? We got about 10 more minutes if you want it.
What? Yeah, just specifically with Andrew's question, I am pretty sure that poultry and meat workers would fall under this definition, but I'm not 100% on it. Nor am I really worried about getting it right, because I'm sure it's going to change. And what we as a community are pushing for also was for essential workers to be included in that expedited legalization process. And that absolutely would include poultry and meat workers.
Okay, I think this is a good time to ask Whitney, maybe to close us out if there's no other questions or comments from Jeremy.
No, thank you to Whitney, Adamu, Anne-Marie, all of you. Thanks for having me. We are here in Greensboro, and we're here to help and answer your questions. Again, I would always steer you for immigration policy discussions to aila.org, AILA.org, an organization that I'm proud to be part of the leadership of. So I'll turn it over to Whitney, and thank you so much.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are.
I want to thank you, Jeremy, for a comprehensive and current and nimble address that I think is deeply meaningful for us to hear. You have been so responsive to our questions that I particularly appreciate that. It is a time, I think, to realize how often we hear that the arc of the moral universe is long, but in the end that it bends toward justice. But what you're reminding us, and we're also reminded, is that it doesn't bend all by itself. Bending toward justice takes us, our sustained commitment, our activism, and our work. And I think today illustrated that so beautifully, Jeremy, with what you have presented for us. So thank you. Thanks to everyone. I'm signing out.
Thank you, Whitney. And this ends our program. We will be sending an email to all those who registered for this with links to other opportunities for engagement that was shared during this conversation. And so onward, and have a wonderful afternoon.